There are few visual signs around London that local government and the European parliamentary elections are looming, but voting trends suggest most of the electorate will stay at home on May the 22nd. Since direct elections began in 1979, only around a third of British voters have bothered to cast ballots for the European Parliament that many Britons feel is a remote and anonymous entity across the Channel that has little bearing on their lives. While geography is a key factor in explaining British ambivalence towards Europe, Marketing Manager-Director Michael Hantman says lack of transparency is the real barrier.
In terms of people's engagement in what's happening in Europe, there isn't enough sort of transparency within what happens in Brussels to how it relates to people's lives here.
According to a newly published study undertaken by the UK-based Electoral Reform Society, the divide between European institutions and the British people is wider than ever. An ERS survey published at the end of April suggested that 3/4 of British voters felt their voices did not count in the EU. ERS Chief Executive Katie Goes said the disconnection was not a new phenomenon, but the gap was getting wider, and she urged political parties to take the lead on reducing the EU's democratic deficit.
95% of British voters do not know who their MEP is, which is pretty shocking and is another example of this divide there is between British voters and European affairs. There's something very simple we could do, which is to change the voting system. None of the parties or the voters, much like the current system that we've got.
Britain is one of 8 countries, including Germany and France, to use a closed list system, under which voters elect a party rather than an individual. The parties themselves decide who goes on the candidate list for each of the 12 electoral regions that make up Britain's 73 European seats. The ones ranked at the top of the list stand the best chance of being elected according to the party's share of the vote. Conservative MEP Syed Kamal agrees the current electoral system is confusing and should be changed.
In Britain, when you have, say, somewhere like London, where there are 8 MEPs for the whole London, people tend to write to all of us, or none of us at all. And actually, the old system I thought was much better when you had one MEP for one part of London. And I think we should look at ideas of how you can get that better link between the individual MEP and the constituency.
Opinion polls predict the Eurosceptic United Kingdom Independence Party will cause a political earthquake and top the poll on May the 22nd, reigniting the unresolved debate over whether British interest would be best served in or out of the European Union.
Right now, public opinion is divided. And also I think it's perhaps more sophisticated than some of the headlines we see, which are all about in or out of the EU. Quite a lot of voters aren't sure what they think. Some feel very strongly one way or the other, and some would like to see some reform of the EU institutions. And we really think that if we strengthen the role of the national parliament and had our MPs scrutinising, even initiating EU legislation better and involving citizens in those conversations, that might help to start to bridge the divide between British voters and the EU.
A likely UKIP victory on May the 22nd will shake up a British political system that is increasingly viewed by a sizable chunk of the electorate as detached, self-serving and unresponsive. Such resentment that helped transform UKIP, which wants Britain to exit the EU and to sharply curb immigration, from a marginal protest party into one poised to shape the political conversation about Britain's future role in Europe. The 2014 European elections are very likely to be a catalyst for an unprecedented political shake-up in Britain that will reverberate not just in London, but in Brussels and Strasbourg too.